Hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, IDC and HP, Employee Adoption Equals Success with HP Software. This, next slide please. This presentation is brought to you by HP. Next slide. I am your host. My name is Mark Herbert. I am chapter leader for Vivit here in Arizona. I'm also on the board of directors for Vivit. I am the education chairperson. It's a pleasure to be with you all today and to host this webinar event. Next slide, please. Today we have some great presenters, some great material for you. We have Susan Merriman, who is the worldwide lead of emerging technologies with HP Software. We have Malcolm, who I'll refer to as Mal Pullen, Director of Product Strategy for, and I hope I don't botch this up again, Ancili Solutions. Mal, you can correct me later. Cushing Anderson, who is the Program Vice President, Project-Based Services for IDC. Next slide, please. Just a few things to go over, folks. First of all, this event for Vivit members is being recorded, and the presentation will be made available through the Vivit website later after the webinar is complete. We also have some Q&A opportunity here during the presentation. So you can ask your questions as the webinar goes along in the questions frame, and they will be answered, or as many of them as they can, within the time we have, and whatever we don't get to complete presentation or question and answer wise, excuse me, we'll address offline afterwards, but we'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, again, if you're less familiar with GoToWebinar, you have a place, as you can see there in the middle section of the pop-out window on your right, the frame for typing in your questions and hitting the send. And the moderators of the webinar will, of course, queue those up, and we'll address those at the question and answer portion of the presentation. Next slide, please.
Okay, I guess I could take it from here.
Yes, I was going to say I'm going to hand this over to Mal and go for there. Go right ahead, Mal.
Great, thank you, Mark, and I also appreciate your invitation to edit your introduction a little bit. The company I work for is Ancili Solutions. It's actually not fair because both Susan and Cushing work for companies with letters only, not a word, so it's a little unfair. But as you see today, we're really talking about 4 topics, really. We'll start with IT challenges, and we'll look at it from the rollout and adoption. When we look at it from a rollout perspective, we'll be focusing on the initial rollout of your IT challenge or IT initiative. But when we talk about adoption, we're going to be looking at that as initial rollout and every day. When we look at research in the market, Cushing will share a lot that's available in the market and relevant to your organization as well. And we'll go then to strategies, methods, and processes to help really conquer that. When we get to the technologies enablement trends, that's where we'll talk a little bit more about the how-to. So there'll be some magic in the 3rd point, but then we'll talk about how to actually do that on the 4th topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan to really get us through the process here and talk about a changing world demands a new style of IT.
Excellent. Thank you, Mal. So for this, we really just want to set the stage. I don't think I need to talk to all of you here in the webinar about challenges that are in front of us here in the world of IT today. That's probably why you joined the webinar, because you're well aware of many of the challenges that we face. So just to set the stage, We at HP Software are clearly very involved and on the leading edge of defining a new style of IT that's really necessary in order to survive in today's world and to provide the business what it expects from us as an IT department. And we can look at how things are changing pretty drastically in 5 areas here. So if we think about how we used to develop, it took months to develop something that was mainly desktop-oriented. Operating was bureaucratic and very procedural. Security was really about hardening the edge around, protecting the outside and trusting that what was inside was going to be okay. Governing structured data and processes, and monetizing was really very physical and one-to-many. As we move into the new style of IT, of course we're looking at mobility and we're looking at developing things in days rather than months. We're really moving into more self-service, more virtual, and more predictive, which is very exciting in the operational area. When we talk about security, we're really looking at the borderless world and being proactive and dynamic. And then, governing is that same type of, right now, real-time analytics and more human information rather than the structured data. And of course, when it comes to monetizing, everyone is well aware of the big switch over to digital and one-to-one. So all of this is happening so rapidly, and we as IT departments want to get ahead of things and want to be able to serve the business. And that means several things for us as far as challenges go. One is just simply that rapid pace of change. Things are moving. We need to keep up. We need to get ahead. And that means that any software deployments that we do must not only be successful, which is a given, but also need to be very streamlined. However, far too often, we know from looking at the industry, from talking with customers, from research that has been done, that user adoption is often not achieved when we're looking at a software rollout. And what that means is really kind of a building effect. So if you think about end users who aren't able to use the software, whether that be on day one or a month later, what's going to happen? Well, one thing that's going to happen is the help desk calls are going to increase, and that's going to shoot up the internal cost of support, the dissatisfaction of your employees, and grumbling up to management. None of those things that we want. We're also going to see increased costs in the terms of errors being too high and service being too slow. But really the biggest effect is going to be that the business results are not going to be optimal. They're not going to be what we had hoped to achieve. And that means you're not going to recognize the ROI that you expected when you went through a software implementation. So a little doom and gloom here, but we just want to be upfront about the challenges that many companies are facing today and talk about what we can do to address those.
And Susan, I was actually thinking as I was going through your slide earlier that this is the line that comes to mind is you can have the greatest software, of course, from HP, but if it's not just automation and it has a user involved in usage, then really the ultimate success you see on the far right side is when the users are recognized as the #1 criteria for success.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we have our first poll question. We have several for you today. We're going to make you work a little bit. So we're going to be asking a question. Stephanie, if you could put up the first slide for us, the first poll. The question that's going to be asked is, as you see, is preparing your people to use software before an upgrade or rollout more or less challenging than it used to be? And of course, that time is based on the used to be, based on how old you are, how long you've been in your position, how long you've been responsible, and then we can actually share this to understand what's your opinion about this kind of trend as far as this preparation for people. And since it's only yes or no, it should be fairly short. When you're ready, if we could share the results, we'll go from there. I know myself, I could answer this question going back to the 70s and 80s, but that's a different topic altogether. So here we are. We see, so the answer to the question obviously is an overwhelming yes. We're talking about, is preparation for your people to use the software before or after just more challenging? And yes, I think what that's saying is there are a lot of factors leading into this, and a lot of that, what Susan actually had in her earlier slide, is exactly that. It's just like there's so many factors, not the least of which is mobile, attrition, the fast pace of business, and it's more and more difficult to be able to pull that off. Second poll, how are you currently training your users? And again, I think when we put up the poll, we'll give you some choices here as far as how that can be done in the classroom, through online courses, on-the-job training, or other. And I believe you might be able to pick more than one. Try it if you can. But I think, again, we're looking back to that previous poll. It's more and more challenging. What we're looking at right now is part of the challenge, because we're finding that, yes, we need to prepare for the classroom, but we also need to be prepared to support users where they are, how they work in their job, maybe electronically, not in the classroom as you see here, but it's all over the map. It looks like the answers are in, so we'll take a look at the results to validate what are the trends out there, whether we as, I guess, experts in the field, if you want to call it that, of learning in the IT space, think one thing or another. It's unimportant. It's more what you think and what you experience and what are your trends on the job. Let's take a look at the poll results as they're in. And we see here, this is pretty interesting. I'd say 3 to 5 years ago, we'd have a lot more red in the classroom. But I think what we're looking at here corroborates the challenge you talked about before. We've got a match between online courseware and in the classroom. And then, of course, we're looking at on the job. What that says to me is that we need more and more to integrate the learning and performance support in the interface, in the job, so it's completely relevant to what people are doing, and then it satisfies what they need on the job. They don't have to leave, in other words, just go where they need to go to learn. And then other, of course, if we were all together around a table, we could talk about what other actually means. So I appreciate that. I don't know, Susan, if you have a comment on that.
Well, a little foreshadowing, I think, for some of the research that Cushing is going to share in our trending at the latter part of today's hour.
Great. Well, we'll just go right to Cushing then. So we'll talk a little bit about that research and strategies. So Cushing, you brought a lot to the table here. Why don't we start and talk a little bit about the organizational capability for your first research study?
Thanks, Mal. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and present today to Vivit and share what we've learned at IDC. IDC is a market research firm, so we look at, one of the things that I look at is how training and skills impacts organizational performance. And then it lines up exactly with what Susan described before about how do you maximize the value of the technology investment. So one of the things that I've asked several times over a bunch of different projects, and here's just one example of that, is trying to get a sense from IT managers and supervisors who are responsible for projects, kind of what element of the project had the greatest impact on project success. And as you can see, managers all agree kind of the largest component. There's a lot of components that go into project success, but the largest single component relates to the skill and dedication of the project team. A well-formed team contributes to the success more than the technology, more than any communication plan that someone has, even more than business objectives or the project plan. All of those things contribute to success, but the skill of the team is one of those overriding, overwhelming characteristics that matters to the success of any project implementation. And one of the things we've talked about, and I'll talk about this research going forward, but you can look at it in terms of a project, and that's easy for me to count, but the same effect happens in the ongoing use and value of technology. So even if it's not a single project, but the use of a particular piece of technology or the administration of a particular piece of technology, skill and dedication of the team or of the users is the single biggest predictor of whether that product, that technology, is giving the organization the value that it can.
I think that actually goes back, and you and Susan are in the same camp. Really what it's saying to me is that users are number one from the standpoint of the criteria for success of, like you say, your rollout, your project, your implementation of the technology or whatever.
Absolutely. The technology has to be able to do the right things, but if the technology is not used by folks who are skilled at the technology itself or at what they're trying to get at, and even to the effect of what's the best way to use it in my environment, then the product can't do it. These are not the products themselves, whether it's a system management or a new app or an app development tool or anything, they don't operate by themselves. And they take skilled users, skilled either IT professionals or end users, depending on the app, in order to maximize the value of that technology in the enterprise.
All right. Well, let's go to some promises. If you're listening today and participating, then you actually received an invitation. And in the invitation, we promised 2 minor changes that can massively increase the chances of your software deployment succeeding. So let's talk about change number 1. Recognizing and acting on the proven research that team skills impact project success, just like Cushing told us. So let's actually go to some more research to support that.
So what this is showing off, Mal, and I think will orient everyone on the slide, is that I've done this project, this research several times, but this particular example has to do with ERP software, ERP implementations, but I've seen the same curve across security deployments and security systems and backup systems and system management tools and all kinds of things. I asked 212 managers responsible for ERP projects, and actually should say 212 ERP projects, not 21. And I asked them to evaluate how much success did the project have, and I asked about a variety of characteristics, including met the project timeline, project budget, business objectives, IT objectives, key stakeholder objectives, all kinds of things. And then evaluate the overall project success rate, and then compared that to team skill on the left-hand side. And this is a relative evaluation asking the manager how well-skilled, how completely skilled the team was or the users were, and this is the curve we get. And the interesting thing here is that, okay, there isn't a lot of organizations that think their team is 0 skilled. Average is kind of about the lowest anyone ever attributes to their team. But if we build out once, what we'll see is we'll show off that there's a small change in team skill dramatically increases project success rate. So we could add one build. Yep, thanks. So a small change in overall skill moves a project success rate from about 30% to about 70% of all the project meeting its project objective. That's a huge change for a small change. Now I would say that 70% success rate is probably still insufficient, and we need to get higher up than that. We need to get into the 80s and 90% range. But a small change has a dramatic impact on the outcomes of projects. And if we flip on one more slide, we can show off that this turns into not a particularly large investment. Now, this happens to be a percentage of spending on training, percent of project spending on training on these same, this is actually a different set of projects. This is the 515 broader IT projects. But if we build out once, we can see that just a small change in the amount spent of each project on skilling up your team, it's about 1.5% of project budget on training. If you allocate just a little bit over 6% of the project spending on training, you can move a project from, say, about 50% to about 80% of the project meeting its goals. Now, again, 80% may not be what you're shooting for, but 100% may be what you're shooting for, but you can see the dramatic move with just a little bit more spending. Now, the intention here of the spending number is not to give you a amount to spend on your project. But what it's intended, because your projects are all different, and sometimes you have a well-trained audience, and sometimes you have a less trained, and use a new technology, and need more training and all that. There are a lot of factors that go into it. But I think one of the things you want to pay attention to is that just a little bit more will typically get you a much greater chance of success.
And Christian, when you look at this from a percent of spend, does that correlate directly into percent of time that people need to spend in training? Because I know that's also another concern, of project directors.
Yeah, no, thanks, Susan. That's a great question. No, training is not free in the fact that it can't be done by osmosis. It can't be done overnight. People need to put in conscientious effort to get skilled at something. Even on-the-job training requires time commitment on the part of either the person who's learning or the person who is shadowing to support. But the intention here is that you can, with conscientious effort and with an intentionality, with a small amount of additional training, you can move skill up dramatically. I am not a fan of throwing everybody into it and let them learn on their own for everything. People need a baseline set of skills, but understanding getting that baseline set of skills efficiently becomes the challenge. And we'll talk about modalities and approaches to that going forward. And those making that as convenient as possible is important, but it is going to take some time. And I don't know, I can't give you some estimates. If it were an ERP project, the project team might need about between 35 and 45 hours of training usually to get them up to speed on the new capabilities of the systems they're implementing. But it varies for all kinds of different end-user applications or system management tools.
Thank you.
And Cushing, I think the other thing that I think is important when we talk about percent of spending later in the session, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the business case and the financials.
Yep.
I think we can also look at that as the actually percent of budget relative to the rollout as well. And going back to the poll that everybody answered for us, is that there's some amount going on in the classroom, some amount going on online, but then there's some on the job. And I think what you said, too, I think is really important. It's not just loose and informal. It's structured, and it's prescribed on the job. So it's a matter of actually people get the word training, but I think what we're really now is expanding that connotation to something a little bit broader, to full enablement, whether it's in the classroom or on the job.
Absolutely. And I think there are a lot of different mixes, and we'll talk about this as we get into the modalities discussion. There are a lot of different ways to get training across. Some are more appropriate for some kinds of audiences and other kinds of audiences, but the key is there needs to be an intentionality to the experience. And I am providing people with the tools in order to become successful. Now let's make sure or help or facilitate the use of those tools to be successful. That degree of intentionality is what drives up capability. Just kind of throwing it out there and saying, whatever we get is not the right approach.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to our promises today. So we promised 2 minor changes. Change number 2, recognize and act on the proven research that enablement can't stop at rollout. So again, Christian, back to you with research. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the everyday syndrome.
Yeah, well, I love this chart. It says a lot of different things, but over time, what this chart is showing is that over time, organizations get stupider. What we see on the right-hand side is team skill, and if an organization is fully skilled up to do the things it's supposed to be, that's that goal level, that 100%. But the skills wane. We lose skills over time because people move between jobs. They get promoted or somebody comes into a new position. The processes that they work with change over time, and they're not fully trained up on that new process. The technology changes. We swap out gear, versions of gear. We upgrade a new system version or something, and those have slightly different feature sets, or the processes are slightly different. And then over time, typically, new hires know less than the people they're replacing. Now, all of those things are broad generalizations, but I think you'll recognize over time that matters. And unless we constantly try to reskill or upskill all of the team over time, the impact is fairly dramatic. The research we've done suggests that a team can lose between 10 and 30% of its capability per year if without having a fully upskill kind of methodology, an organization that is willing to kind of constantly refresh the skills and even exceed the baseline knowledge. The goal of 100% is a nice target, but it's also better to get kind of more skill than you needed or learn new things. So you can see on the right-hand side, if we just add one build, you can see that by year 3, an organization could have 41% of its original capacity if the team's skill is kind of leaking at 30% and replacement workers are only trained to 60% of what they need to know. And one more build, and you could see that even by year 6, an organization might only have 24% of its original capability with moves, replacements, knowledge, systems changing, and processes changing. Now, an organization really can't get the value out of its technology when it has that kind of leakage. What 24%, okay, highly dramatic, and organizations would flop if that's the way their team was. But we would typically build up those skills. But any kind of degradation over time takes the value, back to Susan's original point, takes the value of the technology and lets that drift away. We don't get we don't maximize the value of our technology if we're not constantly increasing or supplementing the capabilities of the team.
And I think what's very concerning about this is that it's a slow leakage, right? So it's not as if someone's going to notice from week to week that the skills of their team or their users is decreasing, because it does happen so gradually. And so that's why so many organizations suffer from this.
Right. Most of us, I'm getting older, I had my 50th birthday, and I can realize, things are a little creakier than they used to be. But overall, I don't notice that I don't think as quickly, or that I don't balance as well. Or in these things, as you mentioned, Susan, because they happen so gradually over time, they don't really, they aren't really noticeable. And the downside is when it comes to organizational performance, the performance of a piece of gear, we kind of begin to say, oh, that gear's getting old. We kind of expect it to take a little longer, or whatever. We kind of expect the degradation of performance. But systems aren't like people, and processes aren't like people. If you use them the same way every time, they should deliver the same results. We shouldn't expect degrading capability out of our systems or our processes or our people. We can skill them up, unless you're a 38-year-old pitcher for some team. You shouldn't expect degradation of capability over time. We can, in fact, keep those skills high over time.
And one last point here before we move on is I think it's also a little scary that because it assumes we're starting at nirvana of 100% proficiency. So in your analogy, Cushing, it's not like of course you were perfect at 49, but let's suppose not. Then again, you're not starting at 100%. The same with our team. So we have to do everything to have the scale on the left be high, and then everything we can to keep the red and blue lines as high as possible.
Right. Unless an organization doesn't want to be fully performing, doesn't want to be kind of maximizing the value of its technology, then it's probably okay to let the skills drift. But for most organizations, we really want to keep those skills high.
And this is the picture of the high. In other words, if we talk about the timeline going across and we have some initial training before an initial rollout of some technology, I mean, that's what we're talking about today, is that we're looking at the rollout of systems, applications, technology, and that we need to recognize that things happen over time. We do have stabilization, but then we do have changes. So as things progress to the right and changes in process, changes in software, changes in team, we want to make sure that our skill level goes up and up and up. Of course, this is the good graph. You can imagine what the bad graph looks like. We don't want the bad graph. We want the good one. The results really show on the bottom here. We're talking about hard facts, hard data, cost of ownership. We're talking about alignment that you can measure in things like internal and external customer satisfaction. We're talking about efficiencies by standard approaches and centralization, as well as going back to that, what were the business outcomes that we wanted when we invested in this technology anyway? So graphically, we're looking at the opposite of what Cushing had there, but this is what we're after, but on the long haul, not on day one.
And I like that chart for a lot of reasons, Mal, because it does show off the opportunity for advancement, and it shows off that your skill isn't static at whatever the project kickoff skill was. There is opportunity to get more knowledge and to use the tools even better than you use them at project kickoff, take better advantage of the tools, better integrate them, better leverage the values that they have, and all of that comes with increased skill, not with the same old skill you had before.
Exactly. Even in your 50s. Okay, poll number 3. We'll put this one up. This is a judgment call. How important is training to the success of your project? It's a little bit, we led the witness a little bit, I guess, with some of the research that we had there. But I think it's still a matter of, your own opinion. Where does it fall? Are we talking reality? Is this true? Is it very important, somewhat important? Not important at all. Again, we're talking about importance is in the eye of the beholder. And with that importance also goes investment, as Susan said, in money and in time as well, because I think we're talking about investing resources of the organization, which is just as much time as it is anything else. Looks like our poll answers are steadying. Let's take a look at the results, see what they minute. Looks like they're coming in the way we've led the witness. There we go. Okay, we've got a high amount, obviously a very important, somewhat important, and it looks like we have 0 not important. Of course, that's why we're all here. We all think somewhat the same, but we still have to answer that question. How do we get there? So, yeah, it's important, but what do we do about it to make sure that we can actually implement a solid strategy? So let's now talk about challenges. We've talked about some, but then we're not in your backyard. We're not with you every single day. So let's talk about what are your biggest challenges with the training that you're saying here is either very or somewhat important. So let's put up the poll question there and determine where do these challenges actually lie for you to make sure that we can address them. We're going to be talking about, as you see here, availability of experts, subject matter experts. That is becoming more and more of a challenge every single day. We could be talking to financial. And so when Christian was giving us his data relative to percent of spend, that could be, again, percent of budget of the project for which you're rolling out technology, or it could be percent of time spent by individuals in a learning situation or event. We could be talking about escalated or short time cycle, time scale, to be able to get the result. In other words, we've got this piece of software. We don't have the months and years that Susan talked about earlier. We've got hours, days, maybe weeks, not even weeks anymore. Lost productivity due to employee time away from desk, big, very big. And then, of course, lack of management support, which really could be driving everything above. So you find which is your biggest challenge, and then again, I think we'll do our best to try and pinpoint a strategy, method, et cetera, to be able to get there. It looks like the poll results are steadying, so let's take a look. Interesting. So we're talking about pretty even results except for money. That's interesting. I don't know that I would have guessed that in the same way. I don't know, Susan, if you're surprised at that or not, but it's telling us where the squeeze is.
Well, and I think, you know, I would have expected lack of budget. We all work in a very tight world these days. But the fact that the other 4 are equally distributed is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. I wish we were all around a table to talk about that one, because that's a good one. But money talks. So let's talk a little bit more about that as we go through the rest of our discussion. So let's talk about technology enablement trends to help get to that, because those are the challenges you said. Let's have at them. So, Christian, if you could take us through this as far as your research related to trends.
So this is intended to show off how buyers of these different modalities kind of will change their spending over time, and we interpret that to be kind of increased use. But you can see that self-paced learning, and self-paced e-learning, and instructor-led e-learning are going to be growing. More people are going to be investing in their modalities that way, and that's how much they're going to be using these, how much they spend on these things. And a lot of that has to do with the convenience factor that e-learning provides. It's not organizations have figured out that if they provide the right kind of self-paced e-learning, or the right kind and the good quality instructional material in instructor-led or in self-paced e-learning, that they can get the same values that they would have gotten out of a classroom-based experience, but they didn't have to fly people into some location and fly instructors around. Simulations is also going to be growing relatively quickly, and a lot of that has to do with the efficacy, the impact of using a simulation in order to gain the experience that you need, in order to reinforce the competencies and the skills that a particular individual needs for a particular task. Simulations become a very powerful reinforcing tool. And the way some simulations can be built, they can be built relatively quickly and distributed to a wide set of audiences, and have reasonable fidelity, that they can be reasonably representative of the work environment that they're representing. And as a result, and that people get when they see someone using a technology. It's a lot like a simulation. They use the video to show moving images that the application is doing something. They get a connection with the instructor. And clearly, we're spending more time and even more money on formal on the job training. Things that we're spending less time on are things like this, what we used to call disconnected technology-based training, those CD-ROMs or things that kind of aren't connected to the web. We're actually spending less on those. Now, that's not to say much that the CD-ROM as a device is less effective, but honestly, most of us are, the only time I open the CD-ROM drive on my machine is when I grab the handle wrong and the button pops open. I don't use a CD for anything. I use everything's on the web, and I think that's the trend we're showing here. But these bottom two are actually more reflective of the recognition of the validity and the value of these modalities for cost. Text-based training is going down. Text-based training is the printed out stuff, and clearly organizations have a lot of access to other kinds of material. The web makes a lot of content free, so spending on a textbook is becoming less and less common. And classroom-based ILT, organizations are cutting back the spending on classroom-based instructor-led training and moving it to other modalities. But cost matters a lot, and organizations will find are spending, where they're spending more money is on things that are getting kind of bigger bang for the buck, and that includes self-paced training, instructor-led training, and simulation.
Yes, Lenny, what this gets to me is actually sort of one word plastered across it, would be personalization. So if I'm the user, it's personalized to my organization about how to use the software in my context, but it's also about me individually. So when we talk about self-paced and e-learning and simulations, it's all about me, including maybe even in my language, not just in my job. So it's all about relevance and access, like you say, which right now a lot is online.
Yeah.
All right. Susan has an answer for us, and it's a HP Adoption Readiness Tool. Can you elaborate, Susan?
Certainly. So at HP Software, we work with thousands of corporations and organizations that are implementing software on a regular basis. And we were hearing from our customers about very similar challenges to what we're talking about here today. And they were asking us for a solution that would actually work for them rather than, maybe some things that we had tried in the past that didn't quite hit the mark. And so we, over the past 2 years, have rolled out and launched a tool that's been very successful for our customers, which is the HP Adoption Readiness Tool, or ART, as we call it. And really, it is, getting back to Cushing's point, relies heavily on simulation. It is simulation-based learning that can be used anytime a user wants to use it, so fitting into their schedule, anywhere they are, so fitting into their lifestyle. And very importantly, to your personalization point, Mal, is able to be personalized to how the software is being used within the particular organization. So the idea behind the Adoption Readiness Tool is that on day one, organizations can start using it because we've built all the content at HP Software with our experts. So that content comes to our customers already pre-built with all the information they need if they're just implementing our software out of the box or wondering what the capabilities of it are. But then our customers can take it to the next level by very easily modifying that material to reflect maybe how the application looks in their environment, but maybe, and more importantly, their business processes and how things are done there. And so they're able to take the self-paced, simulation-based training and personalize it or customize it, make it bespoke for them, so that then it is relevant to the learner. They're much more likely to absorb it in that fashion and be more keen to spend time learning it. And the other idea, behind ART is that it's very modular, so that users can take advantage of a full lesson, learn the context around it, learn the process flow, learn where they fit into the big picture and when this happens and why it happens, or they can take a simple, small chunk of information, a task-based instruction that simulates what they'd be doing on the job. We have customers all over the world, and many of our customers are very large multinational corporations. And so global capability is very important. When we talked about, the challenges, we didn't even mention all of those things and then add to it that you're rolling out to 7 different countries with 10 different languages, all in the same time period. That really adds a layer of complexity onto it. And so we needed for our solution to provide that, and ART does. supporting over 30 languages. And the other idea is that art, getting back to Cushing's point, is training is not a point-in-time activity. It is, we're truly moving to enablement, where we want for our customers to be able to enable their entire workforce or affected workforce from day one of the project, but also all the way up, through the final day of using that technology and using the processes. So sometimes it may be as simple as where do I click and how do I do this. Sometimes it might be much more around ITIL and how they're actually doing their processes and managing change within the organization.
Sounds magic. Maybe you can paint a picture of some of the magic with the case study you have.
Sure. So part of this webinar, we would have loved to have brought customers on, but of course our time is limited, and 3 voices is probably enough for folks out there. So I'm just going to share a case study here from Open Grid Europe, which is one of our customers in Europe. And they were preparing to do an upgrade to Application Lifecycle Management 11. And they had several goals as they did that, having learned from past experience. So one thing that they definitely wanted to do was recognize that they had both new users who would be brand new to ALM, but also existing end users who were going to be learning the differences between Quality Center and ALM. And they wanted to be able to lower the training time for their new testers. They wanted to make sure that they had an ongoing solution. They were very well aware of, due to past challenges, what happens if you don't pay attention after go live. And they wanted to make it very integrated and embedded into the software. So they wanted for their users to not have to go out and look for training, but rather to be able to get electronic performance support right from within the tool, so that they could very quickly work with and see a simulation of how to do the process. And then another thing that was very important to them was that they didn't want to have to start back from scratch each time they did an upgrade. They didn't want to have to make that full investment again, either of their time or their money. And because the Adoption Readiness tool is a supported software license, it does provide updated content with each release. So, and OpenGrid has actually already taken advantage of this in their upgrade to ALM 11.5. They've received the new content from us. So clearly, what was their solution? It was art. They were looking at that as a software platform to rapidly customize our content and develop their own and deploy that. They were very keen on the content that's developed by our authors, our subject matter experts, and then I already mentioned the maintenance contract. So what were their results? Very, very good results there. They found that they had more efficient operation of the software. They significantly reduced their calls coming into the help desk, and they found that they were able to be much more flexible in adapting as business processes changed. They found that their quality assurance levels actually improved, and they had increased productivity, as well as, this is an interesting one, increased communications across their IT department.
That's interesting. I'm looking at all of this, and I'm hearing the results of the poll, especially from the financial perspective we had before. And I'm also going back to, in the old line in text, it's like see figure 1, Cushing's data as far as what represents success, project success. And it looks like they got it through what they've declared here. And I even was noting back in the goals, the 5th bullet on the goals on the previous slide, I won't take you back there, but it was about without further investment. So it goes back to what's most important for everyone in the session today, as well as obviously what's very important to them.
Exactly.
The thing I like about this, about those results too, is that it shows off that as processes change, you can keep up with them with art, and that helps remediate that knowledge leakage, because it allows you to change the tools, change the content relatively easily as processes change or as you upgrade software, and you're demonstrating that when you keep the training current, it makes it a lot easier for the folks who have to learn that content to take advantage of it.
Yes, and actually at OpenGrid they found that this was so successful for their ALM that they then went on to use it for an ERP rollout. And now they've adopted this tool across the IT department because they need to see those same results for every application application rollout that they have planned.
Yeah.
And so that is really validating the choices that they made as they implemented this solution. Very quickly, just to talk about, the things we've been saying here is that our and solutions like this and the solutions that those of you in the webinar today are thinking about implementing, they don't stop at day one, but they also don't start at day one. So the idea behind this graphic is that training is very important in the planning and the designing stage. We have customers who are utilizing the out-of-the-box content for ART to completely change how they do their configuration decisions, how they do their management of change, how they work with their stakeholders. Of course, it's used for documentation, for testing, for the learning, and then for that online help, really going all the way throughout the application lifecycle. And that was a very important thing for us because we work in the IT management space. We wanted to make sure that all the way through, this tool could be utilized and provide value.
And I think if we look down the bottom of the slide there, I think it's very important to note that it really supports Cushing's data, too, about the multiple modalities. Not that any one organization will only implement one of those modalities, but everything. So from a simulation perspective, like Susan said, that can be done through the really showing people what to do, but then allowing them to use that simulation interactively as well gives them that method of actually learning by experience. And then, of course, it's not all about them. It's also about our management and our investors and stakeholders. So when we have some sort of assessment here, everybody's in it as far as did we have success as far as the knowledge transfer. All right, our fifth and final poll, as we get into our last section, a little bit more about the business. Do your leaders believe training to be important to the success of projects? The good thing about this poll is it's completely anonymous, so you don't have to declare who you are or where you're from, but at least it gives us a picture of exactly where that is, because it may not all be about the users. It is also about how it's actually governed and managed and supported. If we can just put that last poll up, and people can answer, and we'll get into our last section. There we go. So it's a very simple one. Very important, somewhat important, or not important. And as we saw before, with the budget issue being one of the biggest challenges, I think it's clear that we'll make sure that we address this, because this is really important. It could be that management support or our leaders really speak with their dollars as opposed to just with their speakerphone like we are today. All right, let's take a look at the results here. I think they're coming in pretty much as we thought as far as do your leaders believe training is important? And the answer is very and somewhat for the most part. I think, again, that's very telling. What that says to me is that our leaders and our executives, whether you're part of that team or not, have been listening to the research that's out there and listening and seeing. It's a very mature IT environment compared to, say, 5 to 10 years ago. I know this result would have been a little bit different. So let's get then to the next place of what we do about that. So we'll talk about the business case. So Cushing, I'll pass it back to you as far as some of your essential guidance for this business case discussion.
And I'll go through this kind of quickly. It really doesn't matter whether you have whether it's a new ERP implementation or the implementation of an ALM 11 or anything. Regardless of what your priority is or the initiative, it's important that organizations align the capability of the IT organization to the changing requirements of the business, and that's a business, that's an IT strategy thing. But skill of the team members of the IT organization and the enterprise overall, whoever's touching the technology, must really align with those requirements and those strategic objectives. So if it's important for the IT organization or important for the business to roll out error-free code or to as in the case of the power generation company, about do it effectively in time. If that's the goal, then you need to align people and give them the tools to help them accomplish that. And really, enterprises should establish and maintain, this is beating the drum, establish and maintain a robust training program to ensure that all the team members have the appropriate capability and that the team functions appropriately, and that's how you maximize the value of that technology. And that's how the organization can meet the challenges of the complex environment. So really what it comes down to is leveraging all the different training alternatives and maximize the capability of the team in order to drive the success of the tools and of the business outcomes that the tools will help facilitate.
That's great. And I think the good news is through our discussion today, through Cushing's research, through Susan's solutions that our HP is providing, I think it's really important that we bring this down to, the old brass tacks, bricks, mortar, nuts and bolts, whatever you have as your image for concrete. That's what we want to focus on here. So if we look at the business case from the standpoint of what are our challenges and how we can get value, it's as simple as this, as Cushing said. Those were a very outcome-based areas we want to look at and approach all the time. But in this case, we can divide some of these challenges between those that are the process owners or the subject matter experts or the stakeholders of our initiative. And we could be talking about the challenge of being cumbersome to develop a lot of what Susan was talking about as far as high quality, consistent learning and documentation to support the application. Second, maybe the infrastructure to actually support and to deploy it, maybe in a learning or training environment. But then we're also talking about the users themselves, inefficiencies, limit the productivity of these employees. And then the last one there, we're talking about time. Lack of high quality, consistent learning to, as it says here, to relevant information, extends the time to proficiency. So we can really look at this from a business case as attacking both areas. Those that actually know and those who need to know information in order to be as successful as possible. The value that, that really everybody on the call today has really been able to talk about is a matter of increasing and decreasing or reducing. Increasing efficiency for those who need to actually prepare and deploy, and reduce expenditures to do that. From the standpoint of the users, we're talking about increasing their efficiency and reducing time to proficiency. So we're really talking, this is a financial discussion at the end of the day. We're really talking about exactly that. But I think the big mantra here is the old time is money. Efficiency is time, time is money. So therefore, this whole thing comes down to that. The very good news is that I think if we look at what it takes to be efficient, we're talking about actually turning on the clock and saying, how long does it take to produce the materials that Susan talked about? How long does it take to customize those materials and deploy them in multiple languages for my company? And then can I do it in such a way that it's a very lightweight infrastructure? It's embedded within the application, perhaps. And then from the standpoint of the employees, how do I know they're efficient? Well, they're less dependent on others like a help desk. They're actually able to conduct more transactions within a specific period of time, and they're able to do it sooner to the actual rollout of the software itself. So when we think about the nuts and bolts to make this work, we're really talking about just a calculation. The good news, too, is, again, there's a way to represent this graphically just by doing the math. It's a spreadsheet job. And one of the things that, that HP offers is the ability to actually do some of this diagnosis. Based on certain assumptions, we can take the metrics and the time, including how long it takes to do something and how expensive it is for those people, and then actually come up with an actual financial result that says over this year's time, 6 months' time, 9 months' time, we recognize the return on the investment of what we invested, like Susan said, in materials, in tools, but also in time of people in order to make sure we really take this for a ride and get where we need to go.
Exactly.
All right. Questions? I know a few have come in here while we've been sitting, so why don't we start addressing some of them, and then we'll do as much as we can for a few minutes, and then we'll make sure that the questions we don't get to, that we're able to actually provide on the Vivit website here to make sure that it's available. So let's start with the first one here. Because we're an IT organization, the general vibe is that we don't need to be trained and we just figure it out. Any hints on convincing people this is really not true and that IT applications require as much training as something like a new payroll system? Wow, there's a lot of emotion there. Susan, do you want to start with that one there?
Sure. I think I personally have worked in both situations, working with ERP systems and with IT systems management. And while it's true, excuse me.
Yeah, and actually, Chrissy, maybe you can take that back at this point, because I think it goes back to all systems convincing against your essential guidance.
Yeah, I think organizations that, how do you convince people? I think you can, it's difficult if an organization has decided it doesn't want to train people. It's hard to kind of get them off that stick. But what we end up trying to talk about is what's the value you expect out of the technology, and how successful with that technology do you want people to be? And if we can demonstrate using the graphs that I presented or the tools that Mal and Susan have, you might be able to lay out a convincing case that says, don't let people figure it out. They may eventually get there, but that's all wasted time while they're figuring it out, and that's diminishing the value that you get. Honestly, I don't think that most people can figure out complex systems on their own. They really do need to have the presentation, the material presented to them or available to them that helps them get it right. So I would say use the tools that come in the white paper that Mal and Susan have. Use the images that I've described to show off the value of skill over time, and then see if that helps kind of move the stick. You don't have to move it a lot. Once people start showing on one initiative, on one project, hey, that went much smoother than we expected, that's what, as you saw from the case example that Susan described, once they do it, once it happens well in one case, it's easier to transfer it to the next engagement, the next project, the next rollout, the next initiative.
Great. Next question here. We have a big upgrade coming, so this is all welcome information. Again, a lot of emotion, but we really don't know how to get started putting together a training budget, which is clearly my first step in building a business case. Any guidance? Susan?
Yeah, certainly. So we have folks who work at HP Software Education who are there to help you with that. In all of our regions, we have education solution consultants or education solution architects who can help you put together your training plan. So that maybe looking at it from all angles, what do you need to do to skill up your project team or your configuration team? What do you need to do to skill your end users and to support them in an ongoing fashion? And they can pull all of that together for you and help you to come up with what that budget would look like. And then they can also help you with what Mal was alluding to earlier, which is a service that we have where we can help you build that ROI. So we can say, okay, now we know what the investment you're going to need to make is. How will that play out in terms of return on that investment so that you can take that business case back to your management and really drive that through?
Great. I hope that answers the question there. We have time for a few more questions. It says, if we buy the ART tool, can we use ART to create any other application simulation training materials, not just testing tools content? Susan?
Yes, certainly. So with ART, you can purchase the tool from us to use with the content around your HP software applications, and then just like the example that we had with OpenGrid and many of our other customers, the next step is typically to go on and use it for other tools that you're using, other applications, other systems. So that's absolutely part of the license that you purchase with the ART tool. So we're happy for you to do that.
All right. Let's see. Maybe we'll go. There's another question here for Cushing. I've been in the same role for a couple of years. What does Cushing mean about knowledge leakage over time? I think we're going to do, but Cushing, maybe you can just elaborate a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just do that kind of quickly. So over time, if you've been in a role for a while, chances are things around you have changed. And unless you've conscientiously tried to keep up with all those changes, things have changed, and you're not aware of them, or you're using the old process, and sometimes that causes slight downstream ripples. So what I mean is that over time, and then the other thing is sometimes you forget things that you may have gotten trained in something several years ago, and you're doing your best to remember the steps you do, but you've lost some of those infrequent steps, those infrequent tasks, and those are not quite as good as they used to be. So that's how skills kind of degrade over time. Even though you're being conscientious in your work, sometimes things change around you, or the infrequent tasks become less familiar, and you don't perform those tasks as well as you used to.
And Cushing, that can't apply to you by your photo. You don't look a day over 40.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, what I'd like to do now is be aware of the clock, not overstay our welcome, and pass it back to Mark to close us out for the day. Mark, are you there for us?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, Mal. That's what happens when you're on mute.
You'll have that.
No problem. Hey,
First of all, thanks for a great presentation to all of you. It was very informative and, in my case, timely. What I failed to mention at the outset when I introduced myself is I work for a healthcare company that leverages a number of HP software solutions, and I'm a member of a team that supports the application lifecycle management suite of tools, so ALM, UFT, and so forth. And we're, in fact, about to go from Quality Center version 11 to ALM 11.52. And what ties it to this topic is that we are just about to deploy the adoption readiness tool to help us with the training aspects of making that upgrade or move to that newer version of the tool. So we're looking forward to great things there, and it's a real neat product. And so if you're looking for more case study data, we can certainly give you some feedback later on, Susan, on that. But again, thank you for all the folks that participated and your attendance. There's a short survey at the end of the presentation, and you can opt in for more information from HP Software Education. And by doing so, you'd be entered into a prize drawing, possibly able to win an American Express $100 gift card. So I encourage you to complete the survey and enter yourself for that. And again, thank you on behalf of Vivit and for participating today. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week ahead. Thank you for participating.